All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Play, Watch, Listen, which is a monthly podcast where we talk about all the gaming things and other media things that have happened in a month. It's called that because we work in different facets of the games industry where you can either play, watch, or listen to things that we have created. How's everyone doing?
Pretty good.
Sweet.
Mike's doing phenomenally well compared to recent events.
He looks
all of
good.
us, but both of you guys, Austin and I are fairly well. You haven't been sick or anything, have you, dude?
No, we have maintained our svelteness, but sadly, our comrades here are nearly fallen. It seems recently.
Baron going through it.
Happily
Mike,
not.
Mike had like some. Do you want to talk about that or not?
I can
we
talk
just like
about
skip
it. No,
right
talk
over it.
about it. I'm not going to share the photo I showed you because it's too embarrassing. But yeah, my face inflated on one side to quite scary proproportions.
Were you
it was
inspired? Does shit like that inspire you? You're like, oh, I need to
capture this
somehow?
experience. It was actually genuinely weird, like being for like a couple of days someone that nobody could help but stare at when I walked down the street. Like that was actually genuinely an interesting experience, horrible experience, but like I don't know, it's helped me with the empathy of people who have to put up with that every day. That was a weird experience.
True. Well,
And you, Alanah.
yeah, I'm holding in there. I'm alive. I'm doing okay. Yeah, I've
battered week.
just been through some shit in the last week and have been on a bunch of painkillers. So we had to delay this because I was vomiting a lot. It's been
but I even
wild
saw
ride.
you like right after you were doing poorly, as our two non-American friends would say, and you were there for that charity stream.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't have done that, to be honest, because then I spent the whole next day throwing up. But I did my best. Yeah, someone said, I saw you once and you look like you really didn't want to be there. And I'm like, I'm going to be honest. I didn't.
I didn't.
But like, I was trying very hard to hold it in for Australia. Did my best. But this is a show where we also talk about the things we've experienced in a month. And I mentioned this to you guys. If anyone would like to take the room to talk about Star Wars, we can do that. Because we have
contentious topic.
I know. If you
true.
would like to talk about
it's basically this podcast has become, Star Wars and miscellaneous other things.
Yeah, I'm cool with it though. I have no objections.
It's funny because I was having dinner with
JJ Abrams.
With JJ.
Yeah, I'm about to say name drop. Huge name drop coming.
It was a friend, a game director on a thing I'm working on, and he's not really into Star Wars that much, and I was like, I don't want to sound like one of those fans, and then I proceeded to have this laundry list of all the things, and he was like, you need to just accept that you are one of those fans.
Yeah.
And I think he may have impressed upon me that I am, because it's like I looked at it through the lens of all this 40 years worth of Star Wars fandom, and I was like, what are they doing? They are asleep at the wheel on this thing, and I shouldn't care. But I have a hard time not just being very frustrated.
I think there are like two sides to that where I feel very similarly in that I don't feel like I've been able to enjoy the new trilogy very much by virtue of caring about previous Star Wars stuff. However, I just keep sticking to, but I'm also okay with other people enjoying this, and I'm not going to argue with them if they enjoy it. So it's like, that's the difference. Like, I'm like, maybe this just isn't for me, and that's okay, and other people are allowed to like it. This is a new thing that they get to experience Star Wars through, and if they like that, I'm cool with it. And I think that makes you not one of those Star Wars fans, even if sometimes it takes active effort. Then you're all right.
Mike?
I think I said this in the last one. Like, I'm not convinced I'm actually a Star Wars fan, because
To be fair, neither.
I loved Last Jedi a lot because of all the stuff it did that felt like it was expanding the opportunities story-wise in the universe, the story it was telling. I liked some of the characters it introduced. That felt like finally like a Star Wars that kind of surprised and interested me. And then obviously this new movie just completely kind of undoes a lot of the stuff that was interesting to me thematically about the second film. So for me, it's like, it's one of those things where it's just like, you know what, like, I'm not going to agree with the audience about this. I know I'm off the mainstream. I did love Mandalorian and stuff like that.
I think you are the mainstream. I think that most people like Last Jedi. It seems like they don't, but I actually think majority of people do. I did a Twitter poll, which is obviously not a very good survey. That's such a limited,
Deeply scientific.
but I was
process,
I was very surprised that it was, I think 70% of people said yes to liking The Last Jedi, and I expected it to be more like 60-40. But I feel like maybe we have a warped view, and most people do like the film.
Oh, I think in 2020 we all have warped views, right?
Sure,
Yeah.
it's a
Fair
mess
play.
out here.
I feel like that hits on exactly my impression of that. I feel like this was 100%. There was no way that we weren't going to have the outcome that we did with Star Wars, the last three, given our current climate. Just because we are a culture right now that are unabashedly extremist on both sides, right? People either love it or hate it. No one is really centrist about anything. Why would this be any different? So I don't think that anyone's going to be like, it was, it was okay. People are going to be like, this is the best fucking installment of this franchise ever. And you're wrong if you disagree with me.
Pick a side, motherfucker.
Yeah, pick a side, exactly. So I feel like it was the most interesting thing to me about Star Wars is not like you, if I want to, we could sit here and break down A New Hope and Empire and Return of the Jedi all we want.
I'm ready.
Right? No, you are. But to me, it was more of a, ooh, this is interesting. Sit back and watch and see how this thing right here, which spans now 3 generations, right? Or potentially more, but I mean, for sure, there's 3 generations of people that have experienced this. And just as everything else in our climate is kind of spanning those same 3 generations, the boomers, the Gen Xers, and the millennials, we get to see how those 3 people look at the same thing, essentially, from 3 different angles. And that to me was the most thing. I sat and Collider was cool and invited us to a screening. We got to sit back and we were in super comfy chairs and it's a huge screen. Everyone's there with lightsabers and they've gave us, little Funko Pops. And it was a great little party. And I just let it wash over me, just like I did with Last Jedi. I could break it down. And there was even moments when I was giggling because it felt like everyone was going, yeah, I know. It's really, really meaningful and cinema. We got to wrap this thing up. And it was so just shrink wrapped in spectacle that I was like, sure, man. Jacksepticeye, Sean McLaughlin, a dear friend, said, what did you think? And I said, man, I went into it like I do with when you're boarding a plane that is going to have turbulence. You're in for a bumpy ride, but at the end of the day, you're just glad to be on the ground and off the plane. And that's how I felt about this last Star Wars.
Heartbreaking, though.
I know, but I mean, again, it wasn't bad. It wasn't awful. It wasn't terrible. He didn't do the thing in Injustice. It was just fine. It was great. And we could point out all of the disparities and flaws in it, but it was fine. It was a great movie. I enjoyed it.
I had the perfect experience. I was sat with my girlfriend.
Boba Fett and Chewie.
But on one side, on my right, I remember this. On my right was a grandmother there with like a grandchild who was loving every second and explaining all the backstory. This kid had clearly never seen like the older Star Wars movies, so it was like, oh, and that's the person who did that, and having just this amazing Star Wars fan experience. And on my left was a guy of, I guess, roughly the same age and his wife, and he was audibly laughing at the movie at every point. And I was just sat there, and I just got to experience the film through both of those people, and to the extent that at one point, the grand to my next whooped, and I kind of like made eye contact with her, and we kind of high fived over something. And then I laughed. The guy laughed to my left, and that's very rare in a British cinema. We tend to keep ourselves to ourselves.
What are these fucking pleasant British film-going experiences you're having?
But to my
please
left,
restrain yourself. This is a movie.
Well, this is what happened on my left. So I can't remember which moment it was, but he laughed at a particularly like ridiculous moment in the plot. I think it was when they were on to like their 5th different key to a lock to work out where they were going, and he openly laughed, and then I looked over and like acknowledged him laughing, and his wife kind of, who was sat between us, kind of leant into him going, "You're ruining this film for that guy next to us." And I leant over to her and said, "No, I'm right there with him. We are having the same experience." And it was just fascinating. But it was, and throughout then the rest of the film, me and him were laughing, me and the grand were whooping. And it was just a lovely experience for me, kind of seeing both sides of that. It was kind of, it was like watching, it was like, what's the name of the two the two critics in the Muppets. It was like sitting between them watching it, and it was great.
And at this point, I had a power outage. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. So I lost a chunk of the podcast here because there was context that is gone, so none of the conversation makes sense. So we're going to jump ahead to when I got power back. You missed them talking about Ready Player One, and at one point, Troy went on a bit of a tirade about demons and preparing for the coronavirus. All right, now you're all caught up.
My thought was like, if the coronavirus were like just spread like wildfire, would it take the 405 or the 5? Because that means either Austin gets it first or I do.
Most
I don't know
LA
which one
question I've ever heard. Seriously,
That's an LA joke, everybody.
Yeah.
There you
Technically,
go.
it does work that way because I think it is like very contact based rather than
Path of
just,
least resistance.
I don't think it's just airborne. So it is going to spread in a certain direction.
What's it called? The R
What
factor?
is the coronavirus?
I had
What is
to
this?
research this for we did a game called Quarantine Circular, which was about disease control. And there is like essentially there's the one number is the only number that matters, which is how many people get sick from the last person. If that number is below 1, the disease will disappear. If it's heading towards 2 or 3, the entire world's going to die in minutes. And it's kind of there's a really interesting kind of variation, just like 1 point whatever. And that's the transmission. But yeah, it's always very local, and you can use it to sorry, I'm just getting very boring. And I notice Alanah's gone while I've been doing it.
Oh, no, I'm
Jesus,
here. My
again?
webcam
Oh, you're there.
just popped
Oh,
up.
your webcam's just off.
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know what's happening. I feel like maybe it is the coronavirus. It's in the walls now.
It's like
audio is still-
Backdraft, you know, where it's just clearly alive and sort of chasing you down hallways.
Yeah, but now I'm scared I'm going to lose power again. Like, I don't know, because that exact thing happened last time, but we'll see. Anyway, no, counterpoint, Mike. I find games that are specifically about plagues always very good. Like, I've loved every single one I've played. Like, Plague Inc. Absolutely love it.
But you've not played Quarantine Circular yet, so maybe that'll change the trend.
Except that one.
Yeah.
Mike Bithell, I have a question.
Yeah.
What is the not obsession, but what is the common employment of the term circular within your games? What is the purpose of it?
It was just an idea we had. So Subsurface Circular, I'm going to try and keep this really short because obviously I don't want to just promo my work, but you know, all of this is available on Steam and Switch. It's worth mentioning.
Context.
So Subsurface Circular was like just this filler job. Basically, we had a project that was just kind of starting production, and then the publisher we were working with kind of backed out because they had a management kerfuffle. So they backed out, so the whole project was kind of cancelled a few months in, but we started hiring people. So we had all these really talented people in a room, and we had, you know, dwindling resources, should we say. And we basically worked out what's the, you know, how long can we actually make a game for? We can make a game for 5 months. Okay, what can we make in 5 months? And that was what Subsurface Circular was. It was meant to make its money back and essentially keep the team together while we figured out what was next. And then obviously Subsurface Circular did really well. So we then we started the John Wick kind of negotiation, but film negotiations take months. So we made Quarantine Circular while we were negotiating the John Wick contract. So they kind of both were filler projects. To answer your question, Subsurface Circular is called Subsurface Circular just because that was a good name for the game. It's based on a train line, and the train line's called Subsurface Circular. And then when we decided to make Quarantine Circular, we were like, shit, we didn't really think about a franchise here. I guess we can't call everything Subsurface something. That's ridiculous. I guess it's something circular is going to be the name of every single game in this franchise. So that's what we've
It's like
done.
Final Fantasy, right? Like
Yeah.
Final Fantasy, the reason why they got that name was because it literally was this is the last game we're going to make, guys, because
Yeah.
we're about to go under. So it's like the last one who ships the game. Please turn out the lights.
That went well.
And yeah, and then oops.
And that's, but I think, not that you can ever plan
So-
for these situations, but I think there's something really interesting that happens creatively when you are basically going, well, we're screwed, guys. Let's just do what we want to do. And weirdly, I don't think you should ever like artificially manufacture that situation, obviously, but I think interesting stuff can come about when everyone in the room's just going for it and doesn't expect anything to happen.
Yeah.
There was something cool because I mean, obviously when we were making The Last of
Someone
Us,
have
everyone
a
was talking.
drill going in the background?
So
I can hear something.
I have the most, I mean, it's almost as if they're psychic. Our gardeners choose to come. I swear they're like waiting around the corner going, now's a good time.
Yeah.
That's gardening,
so
I'm
they
hearing?
come, that's
Impressive
the,
gardening.
that leaf
that's the
blowers.
god level of plants that Troy has in his
Yeah,
garden.
that
Like
makes
you have
sense.
to bring drills.
But he has a beautiful fucking garden.
Well, he's working on the elephant now,
a
so it's more
hellscape out
of
there.
the topiary.
It's a
And of
zoo.
course, no matter how many, this happens every Wednesday. But no matter how many times it's happened, and 8-bit is now 8 years old, it still is like, do you know what's going on outside? And he just freaks out. I don't know if he wants to help, and but whatever it is.
He's warning you, man.
We're being attacked.
Yeah, exactly. He's like, coronavirus!
They've come for the plants.
I say we own this, man, warts and all. You guys are here, my gardener's outside, and my dog just losing his goddamn mind.
This is real life. This is real life. We should capture
by the way, people are like, well, just pick him up and hold him. I was like, you would see him just going, just freaking out. So I'm just going to let him hopefully tire himself out. But when we were making The Last of Us, everyone, of course, was talking about, okay, so what are you going to do for the franchise? What are you going to do for the sequel? Because, you know, Naughty Dog does big franchises and Sony really likes big IPs. So how are you going to build upon this? And, well, we can't do that yet because we want to save that for the sequel. And Neil and Bruce were just like, we're treating this like this is the only game we're ever going to make. If this is the last game we make, then this is what we're going to do.
I was going to say, it would really surprise me if that game was written with a sequel in mind.
Yeah, right.
It sounds like it is, but it's such a cohesive, like, I don't know, near perfect story. Like, it ends, one of my favorite video game endings ever, that if they were like, no, we got to save that for the sequel, it does not show. They nailed that.
I would agree. And I didn't know for the longest time. This is a true story. I didn't know for the longest time if we were going to do a sequel, and it wasn't until we were in London at this trashy bar on the east side in London and Neil and I were enough drinks in to where we could finally just like relax because they had hauled off all of the awards, and he goes. So I've got an idea for the sequel. And I went, motherfucker, are you serious? So it was that was the first moment. And then how much that idea changed too and evolved.
But that also sounds like it speaks to, you know, if you're there for the BAFTAs or whatever it was, that sounds like, you know, obviously the game has been out and shipped for, you know, the better part of a year. And if it's like, now I'm starting to think where this could go. That is definitely what Alanah was saying of let's just ship it as this standalone entity. And then if the idea strikes, because I'd like to believe in my fantasy, if he hadn't had that thought, if he hadn't said like, ooh, I know where to take this story and where these characters need to go and blah, 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 that it would be like, we're not going to do one. We're just not, there isn't going to be a sequel. Like we can't force it, you know, just no matter how successful it was or whatever, unless the idea organically demands it. I don't know if that's true. I want to believe that's true because I'm with Alanah on it. Like it worked so well in a way that it's like you first hear there's going to be a sequel and you're like, oh man, but then you remember how much you loved it and you think, I bet I feel in good hands on this.
That was pretty much my immediate reaction was like, oh, you're making a sequel to a perfect ending? And then I was like, if anyone can do it, they can.
Yeah. But they've earned the right to do that, right? With the quality of the work they've done. Like that's an amazing to be able to make a decision like that in-house. Like that's, don't underestimate how few people in their position have that power. And they've earned it, you know.
Can you think of another game that on the flip side, you're like, they shouldn't have done a sequel? Like I love this as a standalone thing. I wish they had just done the first one. For some reason, for me, and I don't want to knock it too much, but Max Payne, like I didn't need the fall of Max Payne 2. I didn't need that one. For some reason, it was just Max. I don't think I ever played it because I didn't like Max Payne 2. Max Payne to me is just still such a perfect game. I actually want to play it on our show because I think Nolan would really, really enjoy it, especially finding the crying baby level. It's just the best. But
it's amazing seeing the world catch up to Remedy's kind of ideas and tastes. Like when that came out, all of that Twin Peaks stuff, all of that kind of weird psychological stuff was so avant-garde and strange, and it feels like Control was that moment where the world caught up with them, and I love that.
I realized how good they are.
Basically. I mean, I think that really was the case, right? They didn't change. They were making these great games throughout, but then I feel like the world got ready for that to exist. Yeah.
I have a weird relationship with sequels in general. Like, it's easier for me to talk about that when it comes to TV, where if I don't want a second season of something because I don't feel like it should exist and I feel like it exists because of money, I just won't watch it. So I just stopped watching Westworld after season 1 because I was like, this is such a concise story.
was a
I
good
don't
choice.
want more. I'm not doing it.
Dude, same.
I'm very happy
I didn't want
Watchmen
any more.
doesn't have season 2. Everyone's like, no more seasons. And I'm like, thank God, no more seasons.
I was so happy they
I
stopped
know.
that.
Just
Yeah.
finish things sometimes.
So good.
And Deadly Premonition is my favorite game. And when Deadly Premonition 2 got announced, so many people were like, oh my God, Alanah, you must be so excited. And I was like, honestly, like, I'm interested, but excited is not the right word because I don't need more of that game because I love what that game does. So in no way am I like, yes, give me more of the same thing, because if it's a story that wraps itself up really neatly, I feel like sometimes it just dilutes it. I wish we got less sequels in general. I mean, I loved Assassin's Creed so much through 2 and Brotherhood, and then everything after that kind of just fell apart for me, and I'm still bitter about it.
What a great setup for Austin, who's chomping at the bit to tell me his I know him too well.
Composer of the 27th Assassin's Creed game, Austin Wintry.
Funny enough, actually, I was gonna say that I'm giving Mike credit for this. That British TV seems to have a very good.
I'm responsible for all British
man.
television
Australian
and pop
TV
culture.
too. I think that's probably why we think that way. It's like, you don't have to keep making seasons.
Yeah.
Stop.
Look at Fleabag. Fleabag was perfect. He's like, here's a story. Bye.
Yeah.
I remember one of my first kind of realizations of that was The Office, because I watched the American one, but I was always kind of in parallel a fan of Ricky Gervais. I just hadn't watched the British show, and it blew my mind. You know, the American one's on for like 8 seasons or something, and then I go and the British Office is like 14 episodes, the whole thing, and I thought this is held up as fully equal to a show that has like 20 times more episodes as it. And you watch it and it blows you away. It's such a, I think that it's amazing. And it made me realize like Ricky Gervais is a serious performer beyond a comedian and writer or whatever, but like the acting is weirdly intensely nuanced. And
I don't think he had a lot of acting experience before he did that character.
No, he played some war-coms in like other British sitcoms.
Okay.
And he
I
was
wasn't-
on
Amazing.
a show called the 11 o'clock, not the 9 o'clock news, or not 11 o'clock, something like that. And he was in Spaced as well, which is another. If you've never
Oh yeah,
seen
I've seen
Spaced,
Spaced.
yeah,
Yeah.
playing his David Brent character. in
Oh
that,
no way.
Basically,
I guess I haven't seen that.
Because it was someone, I think it was a character he'd been playing with for a while, and they brought him in to do that.
A lot of aggressive gardening going on back there. My webcam's not working. Everything's falling apart.
Yeah.
Wait, can you guys still hear the you
it
can
sounds
still
like
hear
it's
it?
gotten closer.
We can hear
Yeah.
both the
Sounds like-
gardeners
It
and the
ramped up.
dog fighting the gardeners. We can hear the
I'm
whole.
like, I'm like muting it. I'm doing like a mute record.
Oh, we
How
might not
crazy.
be able to hear it in your recording. We can just hear it in your broadcast.
Oh right, because
Yeah.
it's going through it.
Yeah.
Never mind. I was trying to be all kind
We
and
would
everything. This
never
was-
insult your amazing voiceover capabilities, Troy.
No,
I'd be
I
incredibly
have no doubt it's
encouraged.
perfect.
As they
We
get
know
to the
we're-
front door.
We're dealing with a
it's like-
professional here. It's fine.
I guess
know that.
I could ask each of you the question of, people talk about sequels all the time. I feel like this is relatively well known, but for anyone listening who doesn't know, is like, why is it so much easier to get a sequel greenlit? Why does that seem to be the case in the games industry? Why does that seem to be the case in film and TV?
Minimization of risk, always.
Is it just because
It's-
people know the name?
It's a known well, no, it's not about them knowing the name. It's that it's a known quantity in terms of it's predictable in terms of how successful will thing be. The biggest thing when you're trying to get money from a publisher or a platform holder or whatever is always you need to predict how will this do. What's the best this could do? What's the worst this could do? And the simple thing is with a sequel, the range of possibility is shrunk because Westworld was very popular, but it didn't hit anywhere near as big as Game of Thrones. So we know we're not going to, with a sequel, get up to Game of Thrones. But we also know that Westworld was popular, so we know we'll hit at least a certain amount. And it's true of games as well. We all know. As game developers, I know this. I know the sales of every game we've ever made. I know how they did. I know how those sales trended. So, like for example, Thomas Was Alone still sells amazingly now. It's just one of those evergreen things that's just going to continue to hopefully do okay forever. So I can go to a publisher and go, we should make Thomas Was Alone 2, Thomas Was Alone harder, and I can show them that data, and they'll know, okay, that Thomas Was Alone is never going to be Mario, but at least it's not going to flop. So there's a minimization of risk there. But then you have with platform holders and publishers, sometimes they want to take a risk, because if they can take a risk on something new that might be bigger than Call of Duty, that's exciting to them. So it depends as well what the intention is. What you'll often find is they have kind of, with one publisher or one film studio or one whatever, they'll have like the safe bets that they know are propping up their year, and then they're going to take some of those wild ones. So like with Sony, for example, like No Man's Sky could have absolutely bombed, could have been the biggest game ever, was pretty damn big. But I'm sure if we went back and looked at the dates, I bet there was the third installment in a big AAA franchise came out within 6 months of it, because that's where their security is, and then they're trying the weirder things as well, and either that'll sink or swim. So it's it's a risk mitigation thing. Yeah, I don't know if that's true. I might be talking absolute nonsense, but whenever I talk to people, sequels generally are risk mitigation. Sorry, I kind of dominated there. Is anyone else having a different take on that?
What I was going to add to that was like, and this is not to disparage Bend or the game or anybody who worked on it, but the pitch for Days Gone, how can that fail? It's like, oh, we're going to do Walking Dead meets Sons of Anarchy, and you're like, well, that's chocolate and peanut butter. Put that in a video game. That's awesome. Why would that not work? But
it didn't fail commercially, right? Like, I know it had mixed reviews, but it actually made quite a decent amount of money, I believe, didn't it?
I don't know. I think it
in the UK, the sales day was pretty good on it, I think.
I think it did later, but I think it underperformed leading up to it.
Sons of Anarchy is probably much more exotic to the UK audience.
That's true. That's true.
Sure, that's definitely mythical. A slice of America.
But my point holds that was a new IP, and I think it came out within about 6 months of God of War, right?
It was.
I think it came out before, didn't it? Days Gone. It also got pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed.
That's true as well.
But which I think that what happens is that disparity between announce and launch, hype. There's such a short fuse on that people, for some reason, oh shit, we can talk about this. Is what we were originally going to talk about. Games that slip, for some reason, there is this stigma of it's not good. Because if we've pushed, there's something wrong with it. They need to fix it. Maybe it's not going to be as good as I want. So I think that there's this common mentality that for some reason, if a game says there's a disappointment to it when someone goes, we're going to push. Like when we announced we're going to push The Last of Us, and they were hell bent on not doing that because they did it the first time. But the reality, the nature of the game was such, is like, look, we can either ship the game as it is right now and it's not good, or we can spend a little bit more time polishing it and be more proud of the game that we want. But because people knew this is when it was supposed to come out and now it's going to be later, there's this shift in the mentality of maybe it's not going to be perfect. And I think that kind of hurt Days Gone as well. It's a new IP. It's falling in the shadow of The Last of Us. And it pushed and pushed and pushed. Maybe the same thing with Death Stranding too. I mean, I don't know if Alanah, if you felt that way. This kind of speaks really within your purview. Do you find that to be true?
When Days Gone was revealed, that E3, I remember seeing the footage, and I was on the post show for IGN, and was like, I have no interest in this game. And people were angry at me because people like Sony PlayStation, their presentations being exciting. I mean, to me, it was just another open world zombie game. And I didn't see enough that was different about it. And then the thing that they very much honed in on being different about it was bikes, which is something that I am not particularly interested in. So that was my take on it, at least, which is very personal, clearly. I know there were people who were excited about it, but it just never grabbed me as being different enough. And I do think that game was probably also hurt by the Pacific Northwest setting being the same as The Last of Us, which everyone was already extremely excited about. And like whether they like it or not, both being PlayStation products, people are automatically going to compare the two. Frankly, they do it anyway. But it just meant that, that game never grabbed me. And then, I tried it, and I generally just, the same thing stayed true. I just didn't find it interesting. And when it comes to delays, I think one very interesting thing, this misconception that I don't get, is every game is always broken. So before a game ships, like every game I've ever seen, they're always all broken. Just really right up until the point that they're functioning. Like
It's
they're
amazing
all
that we
broken,
surface long enough for actual release, right?
just all the time. They're all broken. So to say
Yeah.
like, oh, it's delayed because it's bad is like, you don't understand how bad games are until you see them. They're all falling apart.
Even
all
a
the
few
time.
months before release, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's what's hilarious about like, yeah, I think if anyone actually saw what the average game looked like a few months before it came out, it would terrify or blow
Yeah,
their
I
mind.
mean,
They're stitched up, duct taped, and super glued together.
And they
as
ship
they're
that
shipped
way.
out the door.
They ship that
They
way,
ship
right?
that way.
Because and ultimately it doesn't matter because if it runs and it's not breaking down too much, it's fine. You know, it's
Well, and as like even Uncharted 4 push or approved, and I think Spider-Man was the same way, GTA was the same way. It's like that day one patch, baby, is like you might as well just download the whole game. They put it out, and the mandates of the publishers and specifically Microsoft and Sony for Mike, you know this. It's like as long as you're not changing,
I don't
content,
sleep because of this shit. Yeah.
right? And once you get that gold master and you get you go to cert and Microsoft and Sony both go, okay, you're good. Then it's just like, okay, now pack all this other shit in here.
Oh, yeah.
What was it? I think it was Assassin's Creed. I can't remember which one. It wasn't Black Flag. Or maybe it was, what was it Brotherhood? What was the one with the first one with Hayden Kinway?
that was Black Flag.
That was Black Flag.
Yeah.
I think it shipped with 1,000 known bugs.
It's nuts. But is it
Shipped.
though?
They're
Like,
like,
maybe
we
it's
know
not.
what's going
like,
on.
Again, they just.
I mean, it's not like in terms of the number of bugs that you'd actually have on a game that scale, that's really not as terrifying.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, of course, most of those will be like ultra rare or very low importance. And
Yeah.
no game
It's not a
ships
game-breaking
bug-free. That never
bug.
happens.
Ken Levine was the first person who ever said to me, "Is like it's not a bug, it's a feature."
Yeah.
This is a great add-in quality that you unlock that. That's right. You can absolutely ragdoll through the world.
Yay.
if you
My
want.
Congratulations. Yeah.
My absolute favorite one of those. I'm getting like a deja vu. So stop me if I've told this story here. But my favorite like bug that became a feature story that I got was I was at a conference once with some of the folks that worked on Alien Isolation, and they were saying we were talking about the score, of course, because the game, it was really well done score, and they licensed Jerry Goldsmith's music from the original film and all this stuff. I love everything about that game, and so they had this dynamic music system where when you would hide in the lockers with your little radar and the alien, would be pinging as getting closer and closer. They had it where this kind of nasty horror orchestral swell would come in as the alien got close, and you'd lean back and hold your breath. And then if the alien doesn't find you, it would move away and the music would slowly die down. And so there would be this kind of monstrous crescendo that you had to endure on top of the fact that there's this alien right outside. And then one day they realized that it's like someone was playing the game and that musical action happened, but the alien wasn't there, and it scared the bejesus out of them. And they realized like there was a full-on bug where the music system thought the alien was there and it wasn't, and they were like, "We're keeping that." And they
Yeah.
That's
just
some
didn't.
Dead Space shit right
Yeah.
there.
Yeah,
you know what I
good
mean?
stuff
Where
happens.
nothing's happening.
Good
We're just
stuff
here to
happens.
scare you.
Yeah.
We've got it
love
with
that.
we got it with a prototype. Literally, I'm going to be very vague about this. Apologies, but the prototype for our next big game, we had a bug that I accidentally introduced one morning that just basically gave a bunch of abilities you had in the game to you during a moment where you shouldn't have those abilities. And I had so much fun that morning, basically like God moding that bit of the game. It's like, okay, well, and we actually now put in a couple of extra weeks into production just so we can, of the prototype, just so we can get that feature added as an actual thing so it doesn't look as buggy, and so we can actually kind of share that with people. And
That's a funny way to talk about bugs too, is the fact is you just do something and then something unrelated happens. And you're like, oh, I've added that unintentionally. How have I done
Well, that's because
that?
of the interconnectedness of every game system, right?
Yeah.
Everything is linked, and that can lead to these kind of chaotic surprise. It's chaos theory, basically. Like one thing over here can butterfly affect its way over here, which is exciting.
Again, all video games
we,
are all broken all the time. I saw
True.
this picture that I should not have been shown before. I think it was Battlefield 4 came out, and it was a photo just 2 months before that game shipped of the states that each level's were in, and it had red above it if it was like completely non-functional, yellow if it was extremely buggy, and then green if they were able to ship it, and only one of them had green. The rest of it was just like red and yellow, and it was like, again, people talk about delays as though the game is broken. They are literally all broken until they're sort of not, and then they still are. But
well, that's the art of
just acceptably broken.
Yeah.
But that's the art. That's the art of project management in games, and that's why crunch is such a hot issue. That management in games is not about is not about getting it right and having the perfect game and then maintaining it. Oh, I'm being totally upstage right now.
Sorry, got very distracted immediately.
But it's not about keeping everything perfect. It's about predicting realistically when the game's going to hit that level that's okay to ship. Yeah. And if you get those calculations even slightly off, it's like it's like steering a ship. If you're just like a minuscule rotation off, you're going to miss it by 6 months.
I think I saw you talking about this on Twitter a little bit recently, Mike, is just about how important it is for people who are project managers or even just producers to responsibly understand a workload and how long it is going to take someone to do something so that crunch can be avoided. Like, I feel like we do need to put more pressure on the people at the top to be like, make sure your employees don't have to deal with this.
Or understand the unknowns enough. That's the thing. I think you have to be really comfortable about contingencies and knowing that you don't know things and allowing time for you're basically allowing for yourself to be wrong. And what we've hit in a lot of cases in game studios is it's gone the other way where studios plan in terms of crunch. They actually have crunch built into the schedules that they're working from. So the starting plan is that there's going to be crunch. And then if anything goes wrong on top of that, obviously that just gets even worse.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But do you feel that from being at a studio before, multiple times, I try to visit the dev as often as I can when I'm allowed to. And I try to, if I can, go during crunch as well. Yeah. Just to not rally the troops necessarily, but just to kind of understand what all is going into making that game. And I feel if more people did that, especially on the journo side or even just on the player side, if you could just go through and see what it looks like. And people, I think, again, there's a stigma that's like, well, crunch equals mismanagement, crunch equals lack of planning, as opposed to I did a half marathon once, and we knew at mile 7 there was going to be a hill they called the Dragon, because it is a mile 7 that goes up a mountain at like a 30-degree angle, and it just sucks, and you just have to get through it. And there's nothing like, well, we could have made that easier. It's just mile 7's just going to suck. So you're talking about, Mike, you go in going, okay, guys, we know that once we hit this point in development, because everything bottlenecks. It's like designs coming in, art's coming in, animation's coming in. We just had to schedule the actors. Everything is coming in. And it's this culminating point. It's not a lack of management. It's not a lack of planning.
So we strongly disagree on this one. And I'll say my piece and then I'll drop it. So like
no way, I want to see blood.
What you're saying there about the bottleneck and about how tough that part of the mountain is, that's management. Management shouldn't allow that bottleneck to occur. It should be working. They should be bulldozing that mountain so that's not an issue. The other really big factor here that I think is important to note with crunch is when you decide to do that marathon, you did it for you. No one profited from your marathon. You did it because you wanted to. It was your creative pursuit. It was your, I may be overstating this, but like it was something you wanted for yourself. And it's very different when you're in pursuit of profits for someone else. I work ridiculous hours, it's cool. I get to own a company and literally make any video game I want exist. That's right. My payment for that. But the second, if I were to ask an employee to crunch and we don't crunch, my team doesn't crunch. If I were to ask that, that's not me asking them to have an uplifting and important experience that betters them as a person. That's me profiting from them going through a shit experience. And
so you feel
you can mitigate that. Sorry, Trevor. You can mitigate that because it's like I kind of think you're both right in a way. Because if I'm at a company and I'm super, like I can speak from experience to you, Mike, about your management style, and you're the type where, it's like you're very conscientious of giving someone the space. And if they're not in a place to be able to crunch, there's like a conversation about that. And then, assuming it's possible I see you as the type to like say, okay, well then maybe, we're going to have to just find a way to bring on another person in the 11th hour or whatever so that you're not crunching. But then somebody else might say, look, this is up to you to kind of choose to do. And maybe there's a bonus in it for you or whatever. And like, it can be managed in a way that's not so black and white of this just is inherently a failure of planning. It seems to me. I say all that because I say all that through the privilege of the fact that composers are rarely impacted by crunch the way the rest of the team is, because I can deliver relatively sovereignly from the kind of bottlenecks that are. It's not always the case, but I'm relatively in the same way that Troy probably is too. Usually, I'm mostly in the clear by the time the hardest crunch occurs.
Well, that's where I changed tracks.
Diligence
so that's where it changed where there's a different track as well to this, beyond just the ethical argument which I'm making, which is you shouldn't be treated like that by a boss. The other one that's actually more cynical is every study available tells us crunch doesn't work. Every study that's ever been done on people overworking, and I think probably we all know this from our own lives, if you work past kind of standard 8-hour day for more than a week, you might as well be going to work drunk. And that's actually, the studies have shown that that's basically what's happening.
What if you're doubling up both of those things?
Oh, you're absolutely screwed. And God knows I've made that mistake. But like, it's just, so even if we were to put aside the ethical argument, even if we were to say, well, no, it's not bad management, the bosses should be able to do whatever they want, and you should, as long as they give bonuses or whatever, it would still be the worst possible way of making a video game. You are better off taking more time or hiring more people, because the losses you're making by having, Steve in the corner basically showing up to work drunk every day are insurmountable, and you're not gonna.
Arguably, no one would do that. Like, if putting it into those terms, you're like, that's the stupidest thing you could do. Is like, well, we believe that this is part of our culture as a studio, is to make sure that everyone shows up drunk at least once a week.
If they were passionate, they'd show up drunk. Troy, if they cared about the products, they'd get drunk and come into work.
So you feel that unilaterally games can avoid crunch. Studios can avoid crunch if they want to.
I think I would be very cautious about saying that myself about AAA, because I appreciate the scales are very different. I think it would be possible, but we would have to shift a lot of how games are funded, the expectations of production cycles. I think the only reason AAA, this is a horrible truth, I think the only reason AAA games can exist is because they go to these extremes. Otherwise, they would take twice as long to make. And I think there's a commercial argument that would the amount of things you'd have to change to get rid of crunch entirely is perhaps insurmountable. And I wouldn't presume to know about what you would do instead. I think that's fair.
I feel that really it's this cyclical problem that we have, because devs are trying to meet the guidelines put upon them by the publisher. The publisher is trying to meet the demands put upon them by the consumer, right? But the consumer is simply
in a lot of cases, the stock market.
Yeah.
True, because
via
it's
the consumer,
shareholders,
though, right? Like, I guess they have.
But that's exactly to my point. So the publisher is trying to meet the demands of their stockholders, or their shareholders, to make sure that they all remain profitable. They remain profitable because people are buying their product. The product is being bought and it's just this cyclical thing of everyone chasing it. And then we have systems and an infrastructure put in place that help reinforce that, like Metacritic and stuff like that allow people the consumer to really have agency in the thumbs up, thumbs down of that product. So I obviously it sounds like, the argument could be made that scope, lack of scaling your game and scoping your game versus crunch, those two are inextricably tied.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there is this, it's all made out of fear. It's all driven by fear, because we're afraid that this game that people are paying $60, whether it be Australian, UK or euro or dollar, are spending a majority of a hefty price.
Yeah.
we have to give them a return. So we have to make sure that this has multiplayer. We have to make sure that this has 90 hours of gameplay, even though we know we can look and see the rate of completion of that is going to be 10%. But it's all this jam-packing content onto that disc, as opposed to, and then you have a game like Inside, which is like an hour and a half, 2-hour game, or Gone Home, or What Remains of Edith Finch, or Journey, or
I was actually,
where it's like,
funny enough,
it's an hour game.
I was gonna mention on that subject, like kind of circling back to how this relates to delays, because I remember on Journey when I was brought on, it was early 2009, and I was told this is going to take about a year and a half, and we shipped in March of 2012, solidly double the time frame. And so there was like, I think there were 3 different 6-month extensions, and that was a rare one, I guess, because it wasn't the highest budget game, and so the stakes were a lot lower. Like to Mike's point, about that's what I environment.
That's what I have to acknowledge in terms of, like, in the same way as Austin acknowledged the privilege of like being a composer and being outside of this process. I'm in a very unique and lucky position where the expectations of my games are lower in terms of scope and scale than any of the people we're talking about, and also, bluntly, my stuff's well respected enough that I get to walk into rooms with publishers and say, no, you're going to give me this many years because my team doesn't crunch. And that's something that's taken a while to get to in terms of the ability to actually have those conversations. So
funny, I admire that. Because it's one of the first questions I'm almost always asked when someone is thinking about hiring me is they say, how long does it take you to write a score? Like, as if there's just like units of score.
And you're like, 2 minutes.
And I always say, I need as much time as you have. So right. if you tell me that we're going to ship this 6 months from now, that's how much I need. And if it turns out it's 3 years from now, because I remember with Journey, those extensions, like, there are cues that I wrote in the last 2 weeks that like are not quiet peripheral thing, like the finale of the game. It literally came in at the end, and I didn't know what to do with it, 6 months earlier than that. And if we'd been forced to ship, I would have had to just kind of say, well, here's something, and it's probably, and funny enough, tying it back to the bugs conversation, there was a play test where they were working on it and they weren't sure what was working and what was not. And spoiler, so there's a moment towards the end of Journey, you're on this white mountain, this snowy mountain, and character collapses and it all goes to pure white. And I brought a friend in to give feedback on the game when we were maybe about 6-7 months from locking it down, and the game crashed at that exact moment, and he thought that was the end of the game, and he had like a religious experience because of it. He was like, that was amazing. I can't believe it's ambiguous and it's bold and it's audacious. And it was like, oh, actually, there's kind of like a final level. That
was a crash.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing was, none of us knew. We weren't monitoring his machine. He was in Robin Huneke's office on her computer. And so she was just out in the little common area, and we were all just kind of having a coffee while he played the game. And then he comes out, like he'd been sitting there for like 15 minutes just digesting the experience. And it made us realize like just how weak the end of the game is, because when we sent him back in to like actually finish it, he was like, what? That's stupid. You should just cut that, because I'll never forget for the rest of my life what that felt. And it really changed. That single playtest altered the trajectory. And that's why for me, like, delays, I love delays. I love the chance to like fail more and to try things more. But I don't know. I don't understand the stigma. I think it must come from this notion that delay equals damage control, because like, meaning that you're on this path, you know what it's supposed to be, and somehow you've screwed it up and you're trying to fix it, as opposed to like, no, we're still finding it. We're still writing that story, as it were, which is, you could potentially raise red flags about that as well, from kind of the management of like, wait, you're 3 months out and you're still writing it. But for me, yeah, it's a positive.
I feel like for everyone in the industry, it's a positive. Like, even for media, like, it's always I have more time because there are just so many games. So when they get delayed, I'm always like, oh, thank God. Like, oh my God, like, please push Cyberpunk. I really appreciate that. Like, because things get stacked.
I remember what's so different between film and games. We were shooting Shadow of Mordor down at Manhattan Beach Studios, which is a big film stage, or built film. What am I talking about? Like big studio stages, right? And we're on stage 11 or whatever. And one day they were shooting this big Super Bowl commercial with an elephant. And so we all got to go outside and like see this elephant. I love elephants. It was super cool. And then the next day they were like, you could walk in between sets. Everyone was cool. And then the next day that stage was on lockdown. And specifically like this one little like back alley street that ran behind the stage that connected our two. And they're like, you can't go back there. I'm like, yeah, we're shooting on this stage. We can go wherever we need to go. They're like, you can't shoot here. And I was like, what's going on? And we just kind of like poked our heads around and they were reshooting stuff for Captain America. And I'm like, isn't that out like Friday? And they literally had screened it and went, oops, and said, we have to do some stuff and shot some stuff. And that means that they shot it, edited it, and put it on like reels around the world in a matter of days. And it was a response to people going, I didn't like that.
But what's great now is the Marvel movies have actually now incorporated that into their planning. So it goes back to the learning from your mistakes thing. The Marvel movies, because they have to hit these deadlines, I'm sure VFX side of Marvel movies probably crunch, so I'm not presenting them as the perfect solution, but they now plan around the assumption that they'll need to do lots of reshoots. And I've spoken to people who've kind of been involved in some of those, and like the first version of most Marvel films isn't great. It's like a generic kind of about as good as a superhero movie from 10, 20 years ago. But now what they do is they can now, because the schedule allows for it, go back and then, insert those moments, change those things, fix it. They've basically added iteration into the filmmaking process in a way that was only available to us.
Weird, man.
Like, people are talking about how Cats has a patch. Like that was a digital
first.
film that has a patch.
Never heard of that.
Right, neither. And
are you serious?
I think that's insane, but I guess it makes sense that films could now get patched. I mean, we had the coffee cup in Game of Thrones, and I guess in theory, films could get delayed. I don't know that I've heard of a movie being delayed. Is that a thing that happens?
Oh my
God!
it?
I don't pay as
all
much attention
the time.
to the industry, obviously, but I'm like
the first movie that ever got big nerd right here. First movie that ever got delayed for Universal Artists. I think it was a UA movie. No, Paramount.
Yeah,
obviously,
for the record,
it was Paramount.
I mean publicly. I know internal delays happen. That happened with Star Wars.
No, sure, but this was we have announced this movie. It is going to have this street date. It was supposed to come out in the summer, and it got pushed by 6 months. Was Godfather. And one of the reasons why it was the most expensive movie ever made because they had to lock off New York and shoot it. And there's this crazy, crazy production schedule. And there's the history of making of Godfather, like what Marlon Brando did to go through that whole he had to audition. He had to put up $1 million bond of his own money. It was crazy, crazy. And he got paid nothing to do Godfather. He was ousted at that point. But the Robert Evans tells a story, and the kid stays in the picture. Late great Bob Evans, who just passed last year, sat there with. He says, "I was there with Frank, and we're screening Godfather." He goes, and we start the reel, and 95 minutes later, the lights come back on. And he said, I looked at Francis and I said, you shot an epic and you turned in a goddamn trailer. Get me the rest of my movie. Whoa. So the original cut of Godfather was like an hour and a half. There was a whole of like hour, 45 minutes that got cut out and it delayed the movie. And it was the first time he said, I had to go to the studio and go, we're not going to make our street date. And they're like, that's unprecedented. I think it happens all the time now.
I mean, wasn't Rise of Skywalker originally going to come out in the summer when they first announced it? And then they decided it wasn't, I could be wrong, but I had thought that it was initially announced to come out, kind of alongside like the Endgame and that, closer to those releases. And then they said, we should push it to the Christmas window to match the others. And we need more time.
Yeah. I guess I always would have guessed that Star Wars was always meant to be a Christmas movie, but yeah, I don't know. But for the record, I'm also on a lot of drugs. So. Who knows?
It also happens just generally now, like the bigger studios who can afford to will actively like choose a release date once the film's done. So you have a lot of situations where like if there's an actor that there's a certain amount of controversy in the press, say, they'll just leave it a year before they release the film. And it's led to some really weird situations with films recently because, obviously Me Too things have happened and actors have been kind of, we're never going to see that actor in a film again. And then 3 years later, a film's released which has that actor in, and you're like, what happened? It's like, oh no, that was on the shelf for 4 years because because of this other issue that was holding it up.
Yeah.
So I think it happens way more than we know.
Yeah.
Or movies that couldn't find distribution because they were featuring a no-name actor, and then that actor came out and did something really, really big.
That's right.
And they went back and they were like, hey, we want to buy this movie and put it out.
It happened
That
straight
happened to
after
Ewan
The
McGregor.
Force Awakens came out. Basically, every actor who was relatively new in that film, everyone who was sitting on an independent movie that person had made years ago, released it immediately. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There was a. I remember again. I could be remembering this wrong, but I was going to say you teed this up perfectly, Troy, because I remember hearing that they shot the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It was like 2 years of shooting or something crazy, and in the late 90s. So they were shooting this, in the prior decade before that film before Fellowship came out in like 2001 or 2000, and I had heard that Viggo Mortensen had landed the gig as the star of that Arabian horse race movie Hidalgo.
Oh yeah.
He had landed that, and they had shot it, and it was 100% done. And then when the Lord of the Rings snatched him up after that, they went, well, that's going to be huge. Our movie is going to be 10 times bigger if we just wait until. So they literally sat on that movie for like 5 years, and then it came out vastly later. And I could be wrong, but I remember hearing that he had shot that before the fact, and then they realized if we have any. And of course, I think the hilarious thing is that it came out and totally bombed. But I could be fuzzy on those.
You got to stay up to date in the horse-based drama
Yeah.
category.
Yeah.
So much innovation.
Catch on.
You have to be cutting edge there.
True.
Yeah.
It's
You know
true.
what I love about this podcast is we cover a swath.
It's a wide net, isn't it? It's a wide net.
we went through power outages, coronavirus. We did our due diligence of covering Star Wars, and we ended on Star Wars, which is great.
Yay, full circle. Yeah, I did
we
want
get
to,
to-
before we cut off, advocate for the audience in a way that I feel like we just didn't mention. Oh, there goes my webcam again. We did not mention that I do understand why consumers or people who play video games get frustrated by a game date being announced and then a delay coming really soon after. And I understand the sentiment of, then why did you announce the release date when you did? And I think that's a lot of the time to do with the marketing team, and yelling at devs is not going to help anyone. But I fully understand why people find that frustrating, especially because I think sometimes we forget games are expensive and people have to budget to pre-order one thing. And sometimes that's the only game that they really get to play that whole year. And that's not that uncommon that they can only buy one, in Australia, one $100 game. So when you delay that game because you've announced a release date and you've pushed it, I fully understand why that part of it gets a lot of criticism.
Does it seem to everyone else, though, like the audience are actually being much more generous about that with us? Like, it feels like the reaction to the last couple of delays has been more
If
kind.
it's a game they love, like you said, Alanah, I feel like people with Cyberpunk were like, "Go, please wait." Last of Us, please wait.
Yeah.
It's other games that maybe are new IP, even though Cyberpunk is a new IP. But I've seen people be like, "Oh God, delay! I'm heartbroken. Why are they doing this?" It's games that haven't been proven. When they're precious about it, I see by and large people have been like supportive.
I think it's also
of it.
just getting to see developers openly talk about that stuff on Twitter is probably opening people's eyes up to how it works.
Yeah,
That's a good
what I was
thing.
going to
That's a
say.
good thing.
I think there's more transparency generally than there used to be, and people are more the openness of people like you guys, or I see a lot of developers that I had all this admiration of for the longest time, but I didn't know anything about them, like Tim Schafer, or even like Ron Gilbert, or like my childhood heroes, and then thanks to Twitter, I have a vastly greater insight into their process, into what they're dealing with, and that sort of thing. And I feel like that has a pretty net positive. I mean, obviously, people can be sort of targeted for harassment and shit in ways that was never really possible before if they decide they don't approve of your delay. Whoa, what kind of crazy
looks fucking
Alana's in an
dope.
80s music video.
Please,
She,
please
for
For
tell
everyone
me
who's
that you
listening to
can
the
keep
audio,
that.
bummer. Yeah, my webcam
That was
just
fucking.
glitched
Please
out
tell me
hard.
whatever Austin was saying.
That was pure. That was your cyberpunk rallying cry right there.
Oh
Very
man,
nice. Good work. Logitech Brio, ladies and gentlemen.
yeah.
Cutting edge.
No, but there are obviously huge negatives to Twitter, but I agree, Austin, that there are also major positives to us being able to understand how games work better. And I think even the understanding that games are always broken and are extremely difficult to make. And I appreciate every developer who speaks up about that stuff, even if it means you're inviting yourself to get a lot of criticism from people who don't really understand. So
Oh, it's just
thank you to
every
all
day
of you
though.
for
In fairness.
sharing your wisdom.
Developers, I think developers. Sorry, I'm not. I was gonna say. I think developers and publishers are also getting a little more savvy about how to kind of play that as well. Like I'm working on a game that they knew there was a really good chance of it having a few months added to the schedule. So initially there was like they just forever they announced the game and then it was no release date announced. We'll keep you posted. And then finally they got confident enough to say it's going to be 2020.
Yeah.
But they knew like that gives us a nice 12-month target window because they've added time, but they're still absolutely within 2020. And push came to shove if they said, look, it's going to be 2021. The only reason they would do that is to make it better. So
Yeah.
Anyway, I cut you off. You were graciously taking us out, I think.
I was just really saying thanks. Appreciate the three of you for sharing your wisdom with the world, and I think that it makes the
Always.
whole industry and community more understanding in general. So that's awesome. Sorry for the technical issues, everyone. For anyone who
But it wasn't me this
Gardening
time.
has finished.
it wasn't you this time, you nailed it. Mike.
Yeah, Mike.
Shout out to Troy's dog 8-Bit who appeared in frame for a small chunk of time.
And is about to, he is looking at me like, dude, I have got to pee right now.
Okay.
So I'm going to take him out
Noted.
before he piddles in my studio.
Yeah, we're on pretty much all of the audio podcast services now, but if anyone who's listening has another one that they want me to add, it's pretty easy to do. So let me know. But I think I pretty much got all the requests covered, and we will see you next month. Bye.
Hooray.
Bye.